Sorry if this is hard to follow. I'm working on some drawings that should help explain the logistics of my experience. It was springtime of 2007. My then boyfriend and I were on our way from New York down to Miami, heading towards a music festival. We were driving south on the highway, along the east coast of Central Florida, when we pulled into a rest area so he could catch a nap. He'd been driving all day when he decided that he desperately needed a short rest. We had very recently bought the van, and he did not think that I could handle maneuvering it, so he was doing all the driving. I later would prove him wrong. He parked, jumped in the back of the van, and lay down on the futon mattress that we had laid there. He told me to leave him alone, and proceeded to pass out from sheer exhaustion. I was pretty freaked. The rest area building was unmanned, locked up, and rather dark. The restrooms were closed. The small rest area building was surrounded by dark woods. There were about 4 other cars in the small parking lot, but no sign of any drivers. I imagine they were having an emergency laydown as well. Normally, I would never have set foot outside of the van alone in such a scenario. In fact, my instincts told me not to get out of the van. But I had taken some Midol for my menstrual cramps, and they had given me brutal nausea. I needed some pretzels. I mustered up all my courage, opened the passenger side door, and squeezed through the space between our vehicle and the vehicle that was parked directly next to ours. As soon as I had a clear line of sight to the front of the rest stop building, I saw the thing. Saw it clearly. Straight ahead, I saw the brightly lit front facade of the rest stop. To the left of the doors was this thing. To the right of the doors was a vending machine. Immediately, it communicated with me. I was flooded with what I consider telepathic messages from this being. I cannot be seen. I cannot be seen. I must travel by night and exist in darkness. I cannot be seen, I cannot be seen, I cannot be seen. And I felt an enormous wave of compassion for the being, rather than fear, which might seem more like a logical reaction to somebody hearing this story. For some reason, my brain only categorized it as one thing initially, an outsider, worthy of compassion and tolerance. Its skin was pure chalk white. Not the skin tone white, the color white. Its eyes were several times larger than ours, and it had 2 little air holes for a nose, and a very thin mouth. Its frame being completely concealed by its enormous, long, black hooded robe. It looked as though it was quite gaunt underneath. Pretty frail looking, actually. It was sitting on its bottom, knees bent, back against the brick front of the rest area, to the left of the front doors of the rest area. It was sitting with its back very straight, tall and erect. It seemed in awe of me, or maybe in awe that I was actually approaching it. It looked vaguely like a human, very vaguely. Its face was snake-like. Its eyes were right on me. I threw a little everyday smile in its direction, and then I did something strange. I continued to walk toward the rest area, even after seeing this thing. I walked towards the rest area building, closer to it. I walked forward, about 20 feet from the rear of the van to the rest stop area, up the 20 or so steps, and to the right, where the vending machine was located. My thoughts at this point were very bizarre in retrospect. I felt bad for this thing. I didn't want it to feel different. I know that sounds hilariously quaint, if we were indeed talking about an interdimensional being, but I did not want to run back into the van. I didn't want to hurt this thing's feelings. I didn't want to make it feel like a freak. It had already told me that it could not be seen due to the way people would react. So I wanted it to know that I didn't judge it for the way it looked, and that I'd be willing to come to terms with its horrific appearance in order to extend some humanity to it. I did not know about fallen angels and such at the time. It was with the very bizarre strong conviction to be righteous and humane to this thing that I walked toward the vending machine, got pretzels. I'm telling you, my stomach was churning. I used the vending machine with my back to it, Snyder's in hand. I swiveled around to look at it again before descending back down the steps. It was at that moment that pure terror rippled through me. I was closer to it now, approximately 15 feet away, and I could see now that there was definitely no way that it was human. It was staring right at me, like a wide-eyed insect. It was still exactly in the same position, except for that it had turned its head to look at me, as my position had now changed. It looked like an alien, or like a demon. It was not human. Its huge, one-dimensional eyes, were they totally black? I'm not sure, but I know that it did not have whites in its eyes. They were almond-shaped, like the classic alien eye that we all know too well. It was then that I realized that it was extremely tall, unthinkably tall. Although I was standing and it sitting, its head stood taller than mine, and its huge eyes were fixed on me, totally, with fascination, alarm, and with the most intense focus, just like the way my cat looks at something right before she pounces. When I made the decision to climb the stairs towards it, and not to retreat to the van, I thought that it was sitting on top of something, and that was why its head was raised up so high. Now, from this closer perspective, I could see that it was not sitting on anything but its own rear end. If I had realized it was this tall at the start, I very well may not have gone up the stairs. So, after the ripple of terror went through me, I responded by simply smiling, the way you smile at a stranger when your eyes catch on the bus. I shot at a casual, thin, innocuous little, "Hey, how you doing?" smile. Why, and how I acted as if things were totally normal, I cannot explain. I have never acted so cool in my life. You know, there's a Seinfeld episode where Elaine says that one of the reasons that she is a decent person is because when I see freaks in the street, I never ever stare at them, and yet I'm careful not to look away because I want to make the freaks feel comfortable. So that's actually what was going through my mind, believe it or not. If I were to guess what the thing was doing when I encountered it, judging by its body language, I would say that it was somewhat displaced and resting. I have no clue. Maybe it was in the middle of something far more sinister. It did not look like a mutant or an experiment. It looked ancient, timeless, placeless, graceful, and horrible. It was also firmly in this dimension when I saw it. It was not a hazy vision in the slightest. The lighting was not dim. It was not even a remotely ethereal experience. The extremely bright lights that illuminated the front facade of the rest of the area building revealed every contour of this entity. If only I had ever been closer, I could have provided much more detail about its facial features. As I was walking back to the van, I strategized about how to make sure that my fear did not paralyze me and prohibit me from getting safely inside. So, I decided not to look back, or even around me as I turned the key. If I saw that it had moved, or I saw it coming towards me, I would have been too terrified to manage the car keys. I got in the van, locked the door. I screamed that we needed to leave immediately, and we did. As we drove away, about 90 seconds after it was lost in my sight, I looked out the window and saw that this thing, this entity or being, was gone. There was nothing where it had been, just brick wall and concrete floor. Whatever it was, I saw a giant, humanoid snake-faced being with chalk-white skin, wearing a black robe, sitting at a rest stop in Florida in the middle of the night back in 2007. It communicated with me telepathically. I am not crazy and I consider myself a very discerning person. I was driving alone in a national park, very far from people, on a bright full moon night. Huge clear moon, the kind of moonlight you can read by. The road went straight along the bottom of a wide, flat, mostly barren valley, then banked up and sharply left onto the ridge. It was about 10 p.m., and I drove through the valley on full alert, watching for animals, loving the scenery in crazy bright moonlight. When I hit the curve and went into that sharp uphill left, I saw something through my side window. White thing. It was rapidly getting larger in my peripheral, as though it had been moving parallel to me. But the turn in the road meant I was now in its path. So I turned my head, looked directly. It was white. Man-shaped, but without genitalia, and naked. A deathly nauseating white, with a greasy shine, completely hairless. It was crawling, on its hands and knees, but it was half the size of the car, and it was coming so very, very fast. It appeared to have a very rubbery face, distorted by hate, or a scream. Black eyes that reflected the moonlight. The look on its face, I can't even tell you. I could still make myself feel sick from the memory. I believed that it was intelligent, that it wanted to tear me apart with its teeth. The speed it possessed was horrifying. It went from being a small white spot to spitting distance in the time it took to make that turn. When I unfroze myself and hit the gas, it was on the road. I braced for it to run into my car door. Then it was gone. The rearview mirror showed me nothing. I have never told anybody. I have seen a few minor glitchy, ghosty things over my many years, but nothing has ever frightened me like that. It was looking at me, and I don't know what it was. I can't seem to find any reference to anything like it, and I would like to know if this thing is known to folklore. If anywhere else would be better to ask, just say. Also, I looked into the whole Skinwalker and Wendigo idea, and it's a case of almost but not quite. Are Skinwalkers ever seen without skins? Then maybe. Can Wendigos be stocky instead of skinny? Then maybe. I am most intrigued by the Massachusetts story. Also, while I describe it as screaming, that's just the look on its face. I heard nothing. No sound. This happened in Newfoundland. Newfoundlanders have no trouble telling ghost stories, and a lot of them believe in fairies. But I've not heard of a creature like this before. As for the bear idea, Newfoundland has only black bears. Hell, I even tried to tell myself it was a badly lost wet polar bear. But when I say the thing was crawling, I mean I could see its legs, below the knee. It was very close to it by the end, and it kind of resembled a crawling man. I spent a lot of time in that area, and encouraged storytelling in the bar, but nothing like this ever got mentioned. As I said, I never told this story either. The degree of fear involved somehow put it in its own category, as if it would be very, very bad luck to speak of it, because it had seen me too. I never thought I believed in them, but I think it was a demon. Let me first say that I've only ever told this to 3 people in my life, for fear of them calling me crazy. Almost 5 years ago now, I was fishing at my grandma's pasture. She owns several hundred acres in the south-central Kansas area. Where I was fishing, there's a small dam and a waterfall in a fairly wooded area. It was just now getting dark, and I had walked the creek, and my vehicle being a good mile away. I was almost finished when I hooked a decent bass. I brought it in, and as I was throwing him back, something caught my eye across the creek. There stood a creature. It stood only 4 foot tall at max, and it was gray pale, almost looked sickly. The best way I can describe it was like a hairless cat, and very skinny, and yet impressive human-like body. The creature was looking directly at me, like I messed up, and I should not be seeing him. His head rocked side to side, almost like it was dancing. I slowly reached for my fillet knife, making sure not to take my eyes off of this thing. I felt threatened by whatever this was. I get my knife in hand, and it lets out a sound that I have never heard before, and hope to never hear again. It was loud, and very high-pitched. Then it takes off into the woods. I've never seen that again, but others have told me about lights they see down there, but I've never shared my story, for fear of being ridiculed. I now carry a gun with me wherever I fish. Thanks for reading. Apologies. This is kind of a long one. One night, me and two friends were all walking around at night in the fields around a small town in Michigan. Our destination was a junkyard, tucked away behind several fields, a home to rusted-out cars, semi-trailers, farm equipment, etc. We were cutting through the fields to avoid the trigger-happy farmers that happened to live around there. Just about there, and we were foiled by a stream too wide to leap. It was now late autumn, and wet feet would be very uncomfortable. So, we backtrack into the adjacent field. From our corner of the field, there was a tree line that ran east to west, and southward, the land rose into a large hill. We stood for a moment, discussing our options, when my eyes were drawn to a large white boulder, seeming to glow a bit in the moonlight. It was around 75 yards away, and I was idly staring at it when it moved. It unfolded, standing up, a 10 to 12 foot bipedal being, skeletal thin, pure white, long limbs. For the space of a second, it looked over at us. Then it took off. I think it was running, but it may have been gliding, possibly flying. I'm honestly unsure. It crosses the field, up over the hill, a distance of probably 100 yards, in a few seconds, in complete silence, and was gone. Only two of the three of us saw it. After a few minutes of incoherent gibbering, we tried to rationalize, explain, figure out what it was we just saw. We decided it must be an alien. A year later, I was at a party, and the subject of aliens came up. So I say, I've seen an alien. And they're like, yeah, let me guess. In Saranac, right? I confirm. We exchange mutual looks of awe, and he directs me to this Eric fellow who grew up in said town. Eric is telling me that he has seen strange things there his whole life. Lights in the sky, but no humanoid beings. Fast forward another year and a half or so, and I get a phone call from an acquaintance who was sitting at work when he noticed a girl staring at him strangely. She eventually walks up to him, says, "I feel like I need to talk to you." She proceeds to tell him that her dad's friend is the head of a vampire clan in a town. My friend remembers the story about weird things in that area and asks her if she knows anything about Saranac. She gets very defensive, eventually reveals that that town is a breeding ground for dragons. Yeah, to this day I'm not certain if I saw a dragon, an alien, or a vampire. But after doing a bit of poking around, and I heard from a girl that lived there as a kid, that she had seen a random 15-foot scorch marks on roadsides and in the middle of fields. I should begin by saying I'm a painfully rational creature. Nothing even remotely like this has happened to me before or since. At the time this occurred, about 3 years ago, my dad's place was located very near my work. So, I would travel down this particular stretch of road pretty much every day. It was a well-lit road leading into the downtown area of a very small city. The river lay on my right, going to my dad's house this particular evening, wending along, dotted by some rather nice properties. I had been driving along, actually singing along to old songs on the radio. I was in fine spirits, going to see my father. While the road wasn't deserted, there were a few cars along it at the time. All of a sudden, stopping me cold, I feel this wave of emotion crash over me. Fear and grief, and a desire to scream slamming into me like a physical car crash. Time seemed to slow for a moment, the way it does during a surge of adrenaline, and I saw, not 3 feet from my right wheel, something tall, impossibly thin, and absolutely dark. But it moved. It turned, and I caught just the slightest glimpse of something. A face. I could make out what looked like a beak, short and bent, protruding from beneath a hood. And a word for a millisecond, one word, rang in my head very loudly, more like a title than a feeling. Dread. I continued to watch. Time still stretched thin as I passed it, my passenger side mirror coming dangerously close, and as I turned to get a better glance, it was gone. The street lamps had not altered once, had shone right where I saw it. I ran the details over and over in my mind, actually turned the car around to examine the spot. My heart was pounding, and I had to turn off the radio. I was covered in goose pimples, but there was nothing there. No tree or post or any other viable explanation to account for what I saw. It honestly felt as real as anything I've ever felt. It felt as though, for a brief moment, another consciousness touched mine to make its presence known. And I'll be honest, it felt odd. This one is about seeing a shadow person. I did not know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there well since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, so that left me alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, and then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked down there. There was, honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it, 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and was only vaguely humanoid. It kind of looked like black scribbles, like somebody had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way I can describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I do remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid, just like, what am I looking at? Then, it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around. It just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen, because it just came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut on it. I screamed, yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went outside, into the daylight, did not go back in until she got home, about 10 or so minutes later. Normally, I don't believe in ghosts, so I don't believe I saw something supernatural. But I know I saw something. I don't know what it was. I'm not going to give out personal info because I haven't lived there in nearly 20 years now. But if you're ever in Laguna, check out the blue ramshackle apartments down the street from the Whole Foods and near Cafe Zinc. It's the place with ivy covers gate. Second, my wife reminded me that I did not in fact run outside. She found me still standing at the dresser, with a shirt on but no pants. Because people were having a hard time visualizing the layout of the apartment, it was a very run-down one. At one point, the floor under our clawfoot bathtub rotted out and cracked through the floor while I was in it. So, I've shared my story a few times, multiple times now, and whenever somebody asks what the creepiest thing to have happened to them is, it might look very familiar, but here it is. When I was 16, I would jump on my trampoline out back for literally hours every night. Literally. I would just listen to my iPod and daydream to get away from a rough family life. One night, when I was jumping, a kid ran past our fence, full speed, carrying a box about the size and shape of a skateboard. He ran to the park behind my house, held it by the edge, and tossed it into the air so that it flipped a few times before landing on the ground. At this point, I was a little weirded out. He was just standing over it, staring for a pretty long time. Then, out of nowhere, he just bolts full speed back past our fence, like he did not even notice I was there. Alright, that's a bit weird. I just keep jumping and staring at where the box was. Here's where it gets creepy. The box looked like it was moving. Then, something started to rise out of it. I actually stopped jumping and rubbed my eyes. Watched as what looked like a full-grown man rose out of a box that was like 2 inches thick. He had an elongated head, no hair. His skin was orange, and his eyes were huge and pitch black. He raised one arm up to his side, and the box just kind of went into what I can only describe as a trench coat. He walked over to the only pavilion we have at the small park, grabbed the metal beam holding up the overhang, and started to bang his head hard onto the beam, over and over. At this point, I had rubbed my eyes quite a few times and could not even move. I had no idea what I was seeing. Without warning, he just stopped, and his head quickly whipped around and stared right at me. It was like he could feel I was watching him. A giant, and I mean giant, smile came across his face as those dark eyes just stared at me. He tilted his head back and forth a few times. Oh man, I had goosebumps, and my eyes started to tear up. Even typing this making my hair stand on edge, because I won't ever forget that look. As I was about to start crying, and I don't know why I wanted to cry, but his face just filled me with terror. He turned around and kind of phased down the road, off in the distance. Phase like those units the Protoss have in StarCraft that leave a trail of themselves for a short period of time, if that helps at all to explain it. He was gone, and that was it. I bawled my eyes out, sprinted inside, and called my best friend, who just assured me I was seeing things and needed to calm down. I'm sure I sounded insane. I mean, who would believe me? But this is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I know what I saw, and to this day, when I think about it, even my eyes begin to water, and my hair stands on edge. Never saw anything like it since. I thought I'd share my experience to see if anyone else has also experienced something like this, or know what it might have been. As to this day, I can't find anything similar. This happened about a decade ago, when I was just a teenager. My family and I moved onto a country property. It was small acreage, paddock, on the side of the house, bordering on dense bush and forest. No other houses were nearby. Anyway, I would go out around 9ish in the evening to give my horse a last feed, pat and brush, and check that he wasn't cold. He was the first horse I ever had, so I was very fond of hanging out with him. Anyway, for 2 nights in a row, this owl just suddenly turned up and would be sitting on the clothesline really close to where I would stand with the horse. It would just stare intensely at me the whole time, not even fly off, though I would literally be within inches of it. Not even the huge sensor spotlight at the driveway nearby would freak it out enough. Then, it would come up on the light of the whole house and paddock periodically, depending on where we moved around in that spot. I thought it was peculiar with the owl, but that was about it, until now, in hindsight. Anyway, on the 3rd night, it was there again, but did eventually fly off halfway through me feeding the horse. I stood there, stroking my horse in the glow of the faint interior garage light for about 10 minutes, just taking in the night, when my mom came out from behind me where the garage side doorway was to see how I was doing. As we started talking to her 3 chihuahuas, and my bull terrier ran out to the middle of the paddock for a sniff. As they ran past the first paddock fence, they set off the sensor spotlight. We kept talking for a minute, when my mom, being slightly elevated above me, and the horse in the garage looked puzzled over the horse towards the back of the paddock, saying, "What is that?" The paddock, towards the back, became incredibly steep, with our water tank sitting on the high side as it descended down to the other side of the paddock, bush and road. I must add, all my animals, the horse, the dogs, were very sensitive to movement and strangers. If the dogs saw anything suddenly start moving fast out of nowhere, they would have definitely chased it and barked at it aggressively. Anyway, I stepped out in front of my horse with my mom, moved towards the fence to see a white figure hunched over beside the water tank, as if suspiciously out of the water that had overflowed. At first, from the position it was, I thought it might be a large kangaroo, but as me and my mum leaned on the fence to get a closer look, with the light shining brightly, it suddenly turned its face over its shoulder and looked at us, realizing we were watching it. We realized in that second it was a very humanish face, but were both frozen in shock at what it possibly was. Next, it suddenly turned around, went from being this maybe hunched over animal to a giant, slender figure, taller than the water tank, and shaped like a humanoid man, with a long face, mouth, and eyes, white all over, no hair, long arms. However, what was really odd was it was wearing a baggy, huge white t-shirt, which hung past its waist. No other clothing. It stared at us for a second, standing straight up, and then quickly hunched over low to the ground again, and began running down the steep hill, across the borderline of the paddock and bush, just like on all fours, down the hill, except instead of its hands touching the ground, they just went side to side, like someone normally running or walking. Even though it was hunched, its back was dead straight, in that angle, and its neck and head kept smoothly turning over its shoulder, looking at us as it ran as fast as possible. Even as it disappeared into the bushes, where you couldn't see it, you could still hear it smashing through. All the while, our dogs did not bark or acknowledge anything had happened, even though this thing had ran right across in front of them. Neither did the horse budge to the loud smashing noises of it in the bush. Me and my mom, suffice to say, bolted quickly back into the houses, freaked out at what we had seen. After that, I stopped hanging out at night alone with the horse. The main things that still get to me most about that sighting was the out-of-place t-shirt, how it ran so fast and such an impossible angle and against gravity, all while managing to twist its head at us and the dogs ignoring it. So, my question, what do you think it might have been? Have you heard or seen anything similar to my experience? My friend worked at the Harrah's Casino in Maricopa, Arizona. Anyone familiar with the area knows that this particular casino is out in the middle of nowhere on Native American reservation. Anyway, my friend is a normal, emotionally stable white guy who is an atheist. He was working late, around 3 a.m. on the casino floor. He's naturally a night owl, so he was wide awake, and this was his normal shift. He's not a druggie, or anybody to make up BS stories. So, here he is, in this empty casino, walking into the vacant men's bathroom on the opposite side of the casino floor. He walks in and does his business in the urinal, turns around to go wash his hands when he notices somebody standing at the sink, staring into the mirror. He thinks to himself, "That's strange, I didn't even hear anybody walk in." He gets a little closer to the sink, about 5 rows down, and begins washing his hands. He glances over again to realize it was not a man that was standing at the sink, but a woman in a red dress. Right when he is about to say something about her using the wrong restroom, this woman turns her head slowly towards him, and he just stares at her, kind of in disbelief, thinking this chick must be drunk or blind to not realize that she was in the wrong bathroom. As her head slowly turns, her eyes were a dark, glowing red. He described it as red eyes you would get when taking a photo of somebody. He freaked out, doesn't know what is happening, and looks down to notice she doesn't have any legs. Instead, she has what he described as the bottom half of a deer for legs. She was walking on hooves. Anyway, as this thing turns toward him, it starts to move and act aggressively. My friend ran out of the bathroom, obviously scared to death. He had his buddy review the surveillance tape of that area around the bathroom, but all that was seen was him going into the bathroom, then him running out. He may have experienced this. No one is going to believe me, but this happened when I was 17. I'm now 32. I graduated high school, got my first apartment. Nice town. Lived by myself, other than my cat, Snowball. Don't laugh. I named her when I was only 8. A few details here before we really get started. I've never been a fan of cat boxes. The worst part of being a cat owner, shoveling tiny poop with a tiny shovel every day. So, I got one of those motion-activated self-scooping deals. Left it on the back patio, ran the cord inside to power it, and left the back sliding door open, big enough for her to get in and out. 5 or 6 inches. The patio was one of those 8x8 cement floor types, surrounded by a 5-foot-tall wall wooden fence. If you looked out from my bedroom door, you'd be facing right at the sliding door, with hanging blinds. Living room in between. Kitchen that was off to the right. So I'm playing some 56K Counter-Strike at my computer in my room, my back facing the door. It's about midnight, 1 a.m. I hear Snowball start to make one of those awful cat growling noises in the back of her throat. I'm pretty locked into my game, so I just tell her to knock it off, not even looking at her. She keeps doing it. Now I tell her to shut up. I'm irritated because I'm doing well in the round, but she gets loud. This is enough to break my concentration from my gaming zone, and I realize this is not normal. I get it from my computer and see her standing in the doorway facing out, her back to me. She is full-on Halloween cat mode, her hair sticking straight out, her back completely arched. She looks tense. I'd never seen her that way. She is still just going crazy. I look out into the living room where she is facing. Nothing is amiss. There is nothing there. I look down at her to say something to the effect of, "What's the matter?" She makes this insane sound, like a combination of a hiss, growl, spit, and she starts to take a few steps backward. That is when a tiny creature runs out of the flipping kitchen, on 2 legs, wearing a tattered piece of cloth or a bag. It looked like a little cloak. It's maybe a foot tall, maybe a foot and a half. A real-life jump scare. The cat jumps backward, about 3 feet in the air. I jump. I glance down at her as she does this, but quickly look back up. I hear her land with a crash behind me and run, and I'm fixated on the thing. It is moving, but it's like time has slowed down. I'm watching these things happen, but everything is so fast. It runs out the back door through the blinds, with a crash at speeds that don't even seem natural. The blinds are swinging, and now I'm just standing there, dumbfounded. What did I just see? I'm staring at the back patio, at the swinging blinds. I'm not moving. My eyes begin to notice that something is wrong. All the blinds are softly swinging, except the 2 closest to the opening. I see they're making an inverted V. I look at them and follow them down to the very bottom, and between them is when I see it. Its head is poking through the blinds, staring at me. It had yellowish eyes, and a face that I can only describe as bestial. Gray, greenish, blackish skin. At this point, a singular loud thought fills my mind. You aren't supposed to see this. And at the conclusion of that thought, every one of the hanging blinds shoots upward and outward. I jump up again, and my heart tries to blast out of my chest, like I'm flipping Cape Canaveral. Some of them hitting the ceiling. A few fall off. It's a loud racket. The rest are all swinging all over the place. I look at the place where its face was, and it's now gone. So I beeline for the kitchen. The refrigerator door is open. I open a drawer, grab the biggest knife I see. I'm shaking. Adrenaline like I have never experienced in my life. I rush to the sliding door and slam it shut. Now it won't close. I open it a bit, slam it back shut. Still won't close. I'm completely stupid. The cat box cord. I crouch down, brandishing this knife like a complete idiot, looking out the glass door, waiting for this thing to launch at my face. So I'm shaking. I reach across myself with my left hand to the power plug on the wall to the right as I'm staring out, waiting to stab anything that approaches. I fumble to get it unplugged. My hands won't do anything right. Finally, I get the cord unplugged, and I open the door real quick to throw the cord outside. I throw it like a spaz, and it hits the wall and the side of the door and falls down. Still inside. I pick it up, try this again, but this time, it successfully lands outside. I hear a scratching sound, and my eyes dart up. I see 2 tiny, awful hands holding onto the fence. Clawed, gnarly, humanoid hands. This thing climbed down feet first, hanging from the fence. It would have been slightly comical if it wasn't so terrifying. The hands let go, and I hear it land in the bushes outside the fence, and footsteps run off as fast as it can. So I slam the door and lock it. This is completely true. I've heard it all. It was a raccoon. It was a cat with mange trapped in a paper bag. It was neither of those things. After the event, I began researching like madmen. The closest thing I found was in a book I found in the library called Fairies, which is like an art book featuring all the different types of Irish folk creatures. I don't live in Ireland. I live on the US and the West Coast. Look, you don't believe the story. I don't blame you. It sounds ridiculous. you probably shouldn't believe it. I hate the whole no sleep thing. It's stupid. I hate BS paranormal stories, and believe it or not, I am a skeptic. I believe all people that have experienced something strange or believe in the paranormal should be a skeptic. I enjoy debunking paranormal videos and pictures. I want the truth. Was I hallucinating? It is entirely possible. I had an extreme and sudden hallucination. It's not unheard of. This event has had a huge impact on my life and completely affected the way I view the world, the paranormal, and even religion. Everything. My name is Chelsea. I've hiked the same trails for the last 15 years, with nothing ever happening before. I'm still questioning if I accurately understood what I think I saw and heard. Last time I checked, Indiana is not a hotspot on the map for paranormal occurrences. One of the reasons why I felt safe over the years. I was with my boyfriend. We took our favorite trail. It was our favorite because it ended in a peak where we could watch the sunset with an unobstructed view. It was the perfect way to end our time together outdoors. The oxygen-rich air was always a consistent mood lift, and it made the tension of the week fall away, along with whatever difficulties we may have had with one another. We crested the top of the hill and stopped to catch our breath. The sunset did not disappoint. There were enough low-hanging clouds to catch the sky's fire. My boyfriend began massaging my shoulders. I always felt a little closer to him after a hike. I was starting to lose my balance when I saw him come up the hillside in front of me. He apologized, saying the wind has caught his cap. My blood ran cold as I connected the dots. If my boyfriend was right there in front of me, who was gripping my shoulders? I screamed and jumping forward, turning around to see who had invaded my personal space. There was nobody. I looked around, frantically. There was no way that they had gotten very far. As soon as I could see who they were, I was going to sick my boyfriend on them in a heartbeat. We were the only two people on the hill, and I tried to enjoy the rest of the night. I really did, but it was difficult. Somebody was rubbing my shoulders, and when I saw my boyfriend, the sensation persisted, so I know it was not him. I've asked him if he saw anything when he came up the hill. He said that he did not. It even entered my mind that he was pulling a fast one over me with one of his friends. But he's not prone to devious behavior, and I can't think of anybody that would be bored enough for such a stunt. Besides, my boyfriend doesn't like anybody touching me but him. We still go out there, but it isn't the same, and my boyfriend hangs closer to me, even though he has never fully committed to believing my story. He respects my feelings more than he respects my account. Has anybody else had something like this happen to them? I was long overdue for some time on the lake with one of my favorite cousins. He was the brother that I always wanted, but never had. We stayed thick, well into our adult years. The ins and outs of raising families and making a living forced us into those long spells of silence. Of course, but when we finally reconnected, it was as if we never lost touch. It was a beautiful thing. We finally worked out a weekend where it would just be him and I out on a lake of our choice. Good fishing and good beer. We were both excited, and our wives even joked that they'd divorce us just so he and I could get married. He did look the way I remembered him. but he had a little more gray on his chin. There wasn't much silence, and we had plenty to catch up on. I had more or less resigned myself to the idea that we weren't going to catch on anything since we were talking so much. He was in the middle of a story about confronting his wife's brother for something when I caught a whiff of something terrible. My inner Sherlock Holmes was triggered. We weren't that close to shore where stagnant water would have a chance to waft in our direction. Then, I heard something that sounded like a fart. So I grimaced, and it was still terrible. But hey, we're guys. Being able to do that sort of thing without being henpecked was the whole point of getting out on the lake. So I didn't say anything. But my cousin looked around, asked what the awful smell was. I searched his face for any hint or inkling of irony or joking. I could tell he was serious. We both heard the sound, the one that sounded embarrassing. We could both tell it was not coming from either one of us. We both looked at the water, and I didn't see anything for several long seconds. But then, I saw something pulpy and long brushing the sides of our boat. I thought they were fish or snakes at first, but then one of them began feeling up the side of the boat. I was no marine biologist, but I know a tentacle when I see one. The part that made my heart start hammering was the fact that there was something like teeth on the underside of the tentacle, either for grasping or for tearing, or both. My cousin says that he never saw it, but I did, and that was enough to make me call it a day. I fired up the motor, and I swear the boat hesitated for a moment, as if in the grasp of something from underneath. But then we were free, and we made it back to safety. He still thinks I'm a little delusional. He doesn't know what I saw, but he's convinced that it wasn't just some unidentified sea monster. My eyes are just fine, and so is my judgment. I may not know what I saw either, but I swear that it was dangerous, and it was big enough to manhandle our entire boat. I had a horrible experience. One, when camping, that still freaks me out to this day. Nobody else saw it. Only me, despite the site being fairly full. But I believe it was real. I was with my family, my parents and 3 much younger siblings. In another tent was my aunt, uncle, plus 2 younger cousins. I was the only teen. And still, I got on fine with everybody and was happy to muck in and help out. Because of this, they were happy to let me do my own thing sometimes and head off to try to find some kids closer to my age or join in the activities, or even just to chill on my own for a bit and some much needed quiet time away. It was on one of those evenings, having spent most of the day in the lake with the small fry, that I decided to head into the woods for some much needed alone time. Mainly, as I had overheard a couple of girls whispering about some possible late night skinny dipping. I knew there was a decent view of the lake from the trees. You gotta remember as I tell you this, it was the late 80s and I was 14, full of hormones, and yet to even kiss a girl. That sort of temptation was too hard to pass up. It was later then that I usually allowed to it as it got pretty dark. But I had been such a good big brother. They were letting me stay up later and later. I was just about to reach the spot in the trees where you could peek through and see the lake. I could already hear the girls splashing, when I heard something closer than the sounds of the girls. Much closer, like just a couple of trees over. The noise was like twigs and leaves crunching, alongside heavy panting. I admit, at first, I thought maybe it was another guy watching the girls. Even though I was embarrassed and didn't want to get myself caught, my teenage curiosity got the better of me ultimately, and I needed to know who this other person was. I managed to get myself into an almost crouching position, stealthily moved across to see who had the same idea. What I saw, I will never forget. No, it wasn't a guy. Not even a person. I don't think it could have been a person. To start with, they were covered in hair. Now, since it was dark, I will always be grateful for that, as it did not see me. I didn't get the best look at it. How much I 100% remember, and how much I filled in with imagination, I don't know for certain. There was some light coming from the moon. That gave me just enough light to see this thing next to me, covered in dark hair. And then I also saw the wings. 2 large, scaly black wings close to its body. It was watching the girls, but it did not seem to be doing anything like I had been there. No, it appeared to be looking at them like with hunger, rather than lust. Its head was kind of like a bird, which would also account for the wings. But it looked hairy and scaly, not feathery, kind of like a man-sized bird thing, with a humanish face, with a sort of hooked beak for a nose. That's the best I can do, because then it let out this humongous scream, and it screeched right back at me, and then flew up into the air, as if somebody had a bungee cord on it. I think I probably fainted, as the next thing I remember is being woken up by some concerned-looking workers from the camp, and my dad carrying me back. I didn't tell them the whole truth about why I had been there. I said that I'd be getting some fresh air when I had heard some strange noises, and went to investigate. I told them that I had found a strange man standing there, watching the girls, and had screamed to alert them. I was deemed a hero. The police took a statement and did a search, but, of course, they found nothing, other than some really odd footprints close to where they had found mine, which did not make much sense, as they seemed to have claw marks. I own horses, and have been around them since I was a kid, and am extremely confident and competent with them. In many ways, I prefer the company of them to people. You always know where they are with a horse. I have a huge ranch, and as well as my own, I stable others. It's a decent enough way to make a living, and the owners all trust me implicitly. I have had rescues and ex-race horses that I've rehabbed, and even a mare who had been severely abused. She had to be kept all on her own, away from the others, and wouldn't let any man near her. Only me and one other female could come into her stable without all hell breaking loose. And since she is so vulnerable, God help anyone who provoked her. They'd be fired on the spot, and if she gave them a swift parting kick, so be it. So when I woke up one night to hear a hell of a commotion going on down there, I was furious. Who was upsetting my babies? They sounded scared, panicked, and most of all, I could hear the mare going absolutely crazy. When she came to me, her legs were injured from trying to kick down the stable wall to get away from her abuser. Since she was safe with me, there had been no further incidents of her getting injured. But now, I recognized that terrified whimper and the sound of a body being thrown up against the wall. Something had spooked them, but her bad enough to set off her old injuries if she did not stop trying to ram the wall. I grabbed my shotgun, raced out to see what was out there. At that point, I wasn't thinking about my own safety, whether there might have been a wolf or bear out there waiting for a meal. Besides, I was armed, but all I was really concerned about were the horses, and specifically my mare. I sped to the stables and immediately saw what was causing the chaos. Something was standing right outside the mare's stall. Something I had never seen before. It was quite small, possibly around 5 feet, and squat, like it was as round as it was tall. I have absolutely no idea what it was, but if you were to put the gun to my head and say what was your gut feeling, I would say goblin. A goblin? That's nuts, right? But that's the only thing I could think of as I looked at this grotesque-looking thing. It was naked and had a pale pinkish skin tone. It looked to be completely bald, and it was fat and round, and it had these droopy layers of flesh covering up any private bits. The reason it made me think of a goblin was mainly its face, which was all screwed up and very pointy and sharp-featured. It even had these awful sharp bat-like ears sticking out. It was completely fixated on the mare, who was still going nuts and trying to break out. I quickly fired a shot into the air, a warning. This thing turned slowly, looked at me face on. I was very glad those extra rolls of fat. It held up one clawed hand, and I could see long pointy fingers. Then, it stuck out its enormous tongue, in an almost leering fashion, just before I could get another shot off. It appeared to vanish. The very second it seemed to disappear into thin air, the atmosphere changed again, and all the horses, even the mare, seemed to calm back down. I stayed with them for another hour, checking all around the stalls and the perimeter of the ranch, but nothing. I never saw that vile creature ever again after that, and I still haven't since this happened. I was washing my fillet knife in a creek when my girlfriend cried out in the distance. She had said something about investigating a beehive she thought she had seen from a distance and was going for a little honey hunting adventure. I came running. It's a good thing I did, because if I'd been any further away, I might not have heard her screaming turn muffled. Something stood over my girlfriend. Something humanoid. It had dry-looking gray skin that revealed the movement of every single muscle fiber and tendon. If that wasn't bad enough, in place of a face, it had a mass of feelers like a sea thing, and they were completely engulfing my girlfriend's face and lifting her up off the ground. It looked like it was trying to swallow her head first. I panicked. Her oxygen was going to run out. So time was not on my side. I had almost forgotten my fillet knife, and I thanked God that I had it on me. I flew at the creature to stab it in its side. I expected it to just slide right in, and then I would twist it. It was like stabbing a sack of concrete. The knife went in, but it met with a lot of resistance. This thing didn't cry out, twitch, or anything. A whole new wave of urgency swept through me. I began stabbing wherever I could. At the shoulder blades, the spinal column, at the base of the neck. This thing just kept sucking on my girlfriend's face, who whimpered pitifully as she began to lose consciousness. I tried the feelers in desperation. Finally, there was a reaction. The monster flinched, swung at me, causing a few more tendrils to come loose. This tested my bravery, since its sensitive point was in its face, where I'd have to confront it. The knife found more dull matter in its stomach. so I made another lunge at the feelers. It didn't like it. I got raked with those claws, which were more like long old lady fingernails. Something about that was more frightening than it should have been. Didn't change the fact that I loved my girlfriend. Another swipe at the feelers showed that it had a ring of eyes under the first ring of feelers, and that's where I jabbed. That's what got the thing to let go of my girlfriend's face. I got a second wind and stabbed at it as many of those tiny eyes as I could. Its scream was wet and ugly, like it wasn't made for breathing the air. It fell backwards, and I stumbled, landed on top of it. I got ready for more strikes, but the claws slashed across my face in 3 lightning-quick strokes. The world turned upside down, and it was gone. I must have blacked out. I woke up in a hospital. EMTs told me that my girlfriend phoned 911 and gotten me to care, which told me all I really cared about, which was that she's okay. I was more than a little upset that she told them nothing more that I had been attacked by a mountain lion. There was going to be so many inconsistencies in that account. She thought that what really happened would be beyond believing, and she did not want to get mistaken for being a mad woman and put away. I still owed her for getting me to emergency services, so I couldn't be too mad. Man, things are really crazy when you look back on these kind of situations. This was back in 1995, and I haven't looked back since. I was a crewman on a road crew here in Illinois, around the neighborhood of Bement. When you're not from Illinois, the term middle of nowhere seems to apply to the entire state. But when you're around someplace like Bement, then you're in the middle of nowhere. The location wasn't just rural. The location was just plain empty. There was the road. There was us, the crew, and there was grass and corn. That's it. We were working on, you guessed it, a road. And we were coming up on an older bridge that would need to be included in the project. But there would need to be an inspection first. I told one of my crewmates to make sure that the thing wasn't going to collapse, and also to check that there weren't any wild animals or vagrants underneath the bridge before we began our work. Wild animals were more likely. No homeless person in the right mind was going to be camping out in a location that remote. Not unless they were a serial killer. I should have gone looking for him when he was taking too long, but I got handed a piping cup of coffee, and didn't think anything of letting my crewmate take his time. I'm ashamed to say that I kind of forgot about him. One of the other guys came looking for him, and I told him that he was under the bridge, making an inspection before we began work on the bridge. So, he too went under the bridge. He also did not come back up. I didn't notice, though, until I put my nose into my coffee for another sip, and I smelled something really harsh. I stood at attention, looking into my cup. That's when I noticed the smell wasn't coming from my coffee. It was coming from somewhere around me. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, and I realized that it was coming from under the bridge. Whatever it was upwind of me. I tried not to look as urgent as I felt. I saw tall grasses and scrubby weeds. I saw the shadows hugging the corners where the ground and concrete met. Then, I saw the faintest red lights. It was overcast, so it was easy to pick out. For a moment, I thought that I had seen evil red eyes, but then I realized they were just embers. I smelt something burning, a combination of burning cloth and perhaps human hair. The horrible odor that I had thought was coming from my coffee. In short, because it messes me up to tell this part, I found the 2 bodies of my workmates. They looked like they had been incinerated, and they were 2 masses of cinders waiting for a breeze to blow them away. I don't remember much after that. My crew told me that I screamed out loud, and everybody came running and saw me with the 2 bodies. The account was so far-fetched that law enforcement went over the case with a fine-toothed comb, being slow to believe that the 2 burnt corpses were who I said they were. But there weren't any alternative explanations. Somehow, my men had been flash-cooked on the spot. I was a prime suspect, sure, but nobody could explain how I could do such a thing. People don't realize how non-combustible the human body is, and those 2 were burnt all the way to the core. Another reason identification was delayed. They didn't fire me like I thought they would, but it did not take long for me to resign. Every day that I showed up, I felt like I could have done something more to keep my men from getting incinerated. I'm disgusted by coffee, even though I'm still addicted to it. This life has turned very ugly. I can't bear to live and can't do anything to die. I'm hoping somebody out there will reach out and tell me they've heard of anything remotely like this happening. I decided to take some time off from work and head out to a cabin that I had inherited in Tennessee. I don't care what the stereotype of a city businessman is. If I don't get back to nature at some point, well, I snap. I could tell that point was coming up, so I dropped everything, delegated what I could, and said screw the rest. I was off to my cabin. It was warmer weather, so the shade of the pines was welcoming and comforting. At the time, I had found it reassuring that the nearest road was over a mile away. I would soon find this to be a huge setback. I also didn't pay much attention as I should have to the peculiar growths that had formed on the side of the cabin. It was all along the bottom near the ground. Some sort of fungus, but it wasn't black mold, so I wasn't worried. I settled in, not fully realizing just how exhausted I was until I had stopped moving. I left a good deal of the stuff out in my truck, but I did not care. I was so far off the beaten path that no criminal was going to work that hard to rob me. I'd get everything else the next day. Before I knew it, I was out. I awoke to the sensation of being tied up. It almost made sense that my one break that I get from work is the time that somebody chooses to ambush me. But I wasn't tied with ropes. I was anchored down by something ropey and slimy and cold. It formed a webbing over me, like it had grown over me while I was asleep. My imagination ran wild, and I imagined that I had been cocooned by giant spiders. But no, I wasn't hanging from the ceiling. I was in bed, where I had fallen asleep, just webbed over by some strange pale pinkish blue fibers that were much stronger than they looked to be. If I had been any weaker, I'd still be on that bed. I tore the weave of strange fibers off me, kicked them down, and I swear I saw some of them writhing a little. I looked around, noticed that the entire bedroom had some traces of the fibers, like they had grown all over while I was asleep. I didn't think that I had been out that long, but it was pretty dark in the cabin. I looked around, noticed that there were chinks of daylight peeking through a mass of fibers that had overgrown the window from the outside. My heart began to beat faster as I ran to the front door and tried to open it, but it was sealed shut. Those strange fibers had even grown in the space between the door and the jamb, so the door wasn't even wiggling in place. I tried to calm myself, sat down at the breakfast table to think for a moment. The fibers were there too. I eyed the fibers clinging to the table, more like I watched the contact point between the table and the fibers. There was definitive movement. It was very slow, faster than a houseplant, but slower than a snail, and it was moving in my direction. I was just as fascinated as I was horrified. I did try to maintain a rational approach and decided to call 911. I found that my phone had been the things among left outside. My saving grace was a wood axe that I had brought inside years back. I took that old beater, and I began scraping at the scummy fibers, clogging everything, trying to avoid the door if I could help it. Well, it couldn't be helped. Even after demolishing the door, there was a solid web of the fibers on the other side, but they weren't a match for the old axe. I eventually got to my phone, called 911, and told them about what had happened, that they should send some sort of wildlife patrol. Well, you'd never believe me, but not only did I get an ambulance, I got a full black sedan of men in dark suits. The EMT crew was a little more forceful than I had expected them to be. They had all but stated that I was going to be with them, whether I liked it or not. When I got to leave the hospital, my car and all my belongings were waiting for me outside, but I was informed that the cabin was entirely demolished and essentially removed from existence. The strangest thing I have ever had happen in my life. I had been driving all over the county. It was dark, and I was tired. Thankfully, my wife was with me, chatting and keeping me awake. We'd been delivering care packages to members of our families, who at the time were unable to get to the stores and needed to stay inside due to COVID. I was exhausted. The black coffee I had been inhaling for the last couple of hours was the only thing keeping my eyes from closing. Thank God my wife was chatting away and keeping watch of the road ahead, as it was her scream that allowed me to ram my foot on the brake as this creature ran out in front of us. Despite having my headlights on full beam, I wasn't able to get a great look at it, mainly because I didn't know what the hell it was. It shot across our path like a blur, then seemed to stand stock still in a daze at the sight of the car. In just those short seconds, between catching sight of it and slamming the brakes on, it looked the size of a bear in height, yet also really skinny, like it was starving. It seemed to have an overly large head as it stared at the car, and we saw two huge wide eyes and what looked like a large circular mouth. Then, slam, I hit it. I hadn't wanted to, and I hope you believe that. I am the type of man who will catch a bug in the house and release it outside, even though I had no idea what this was. I had tried to brake in time. The force of the impact caused the creature to slam off the hood of the car, but luckily we were fine, except for being shocked. I made to open my door, to go check on it, but my wife gave me that, "Didn't you see that thing? We need to get out of here now, look." So I swerved around the lump in the road, and we headed home in silence. I could not stop thinking about the creature, though. Not only what was it, but had I killed it? I had to go back and check. The following morning, I drove back to the same spot where I'd hit it, driving up and down the road as I wasn't sure of the exact spot. And then I saw the blood. Lots of blood. I felt awful. Since there was no obvious sign of the animal, I decided to get out and have a look. When I examined the blood, it was even more strange. There was some gray, fleshy-looking lumps and also feathers. Feathers seemed to make less and less sense of what I had already seen. The blood trail seemed to cross over towards the woods on the opposite side of the road. I walked over, looking through the trees. I could see blood right up until one extremely large tree. Then it appeared to just disappear, as if the creature had climbed up the tree, which made no sense. I drove up and down the road several more times over the following few weeks, going actively out of my way to try and find that creature. I was driving myself and my wife mad. I Googled and searched for hours, but I could not find anything to match what we had seen. I guess I'll never know what it was if it had survived. I come from a hunting family. Hunting buddies. We have dogs that are used to coming out with us. They are brave, loyal, and fierce. In all the times I've been out with people and the dogs, they have never let us down. They would die to protect us, and probably enjoy the fight, which is what makes this story so much more weird. We were out as usual one evening. The dogs were riled up and ready to go. We had picked up a very decent trail, and they were following the scent for us. There were 3 of us. 3 dudes, all longtime hunters. 5 dogs between us, all experienced. One male in particular, a real mean pit bull, literally bred to hunt and fight, had taken the lead, all fired up over what they could smell. All of a sudden, we heard a noise. Not unusual, of course. Would have been weirder not to hear anything. Only this was like nothing any of us have ever heard. 3 guys with years of experience between us, and we all looked at each other like, what was that? The dogs all stopped too, like something out of a cartoon, where the dog stops still and acts like a pointer. Even the big brave Pit, who had been snarling and gagging for something to rip apart, went quiet. We did the typical guy thing of trying to make light of it, laughing, making noises and laughing. The kind of thing you do when you're scared but you don't want anybody else to know, so you act the fool instead. Then, all 5 dogs began howling too, but unlike us, real low long howls, as if they were answering some unknown force. They didn't sound like they were ferocious beasts. They sounded like they were showing their subservience. It was eerie. We called to them, but they wouldn't budge. The hound, who I'd seen rip out the throat of a large buck once, lay on the floor exposing his belly. Okay, something was going on. Then, we heard the noise again, and this time it made my blood run cold. Despite the many layers, I felt chilled and something I had not experienced in a long time out here. Fear. Usually, I am pumped full of excitement and adrenaline. I know, between the mutts and my shotgun, I'm safe against anything the woods has to offer. But right at that moment, I honestly didn't feel like I would get out of there alive. We hadn't even seen anything yet, just heard the sound. You may notice I haven't actually told you what the sound was. That is because it was almost impossible for me to describe. But if I had to, I would say the best comparison would be the mix between a wolf howl and the screech of a bird of prey, like an eagle. And then, it stepped out of the woods, as I said. Until then, the big brave had been howling and showing how submissive they were. Now, having seen this thing better than us, with their eyes being used to the dark, they went into a full-on panicked frenzy mode, whining, whimpering, crying. One just started pooping everywhere. Another actually made a run for it, and we heard it trying to head back towards the truck. Now, if I thought describing the noise was hard, then trying to tell you what we saw, it's almost impossible. Mainly because we had never seen anything like it, and I was honestly beginning to wonder if I was somehow hallucinating, if the other guys and the dogs hadn't had the same reaction. Because what was standing by the trees was something like out of a horror movie. Big, tall, mean-looking. Wasn't big body-wise, but it looked like its body was stretched. Really long arms that almost touched the ground, but short legs in comparison. The torso was way out of proportion. It appeared to be, from what we could tell, covered in dark gray hair, although it looked patchy in places, like dead skin or mange. Its hands and feet were huge, and again, looked totally out of place with how skinny it was. This all led up to the face, that in some hellish way looked somewhat human. I say somewhat. The features were like that, like the shape of the mouth, nose, and eyes, although they were all distorted and stretched across the enormous skull. This was almost oval in shape rather than round. It appeared to have no fear of us or the dogs whatsoever, and I'll admit, I just wanted to haul out right there. But Trigger Happy Petey decided to offload a few hundred bullets into that thing. Okay, well, maybe not 100+ bullets, but more than I could count. It just stood there. I don't know whether those bullets went through it, or just did not penetrate the skin, but the thing stood there and took it, and I did not see a speck of blood or any sign of tissue damage. That was it. I had no issues if they called me a wimp. I was gone. Turns out they were right behind me, dogs and all. We jumped in the truck and hightailed it back home. We've talked and talked about just what the thing could have been. I reckon it was at least 8 foot tall, so I can't see any way in hell it could have been a human. Even if it was one of those hillbilly Deliverance or Melonhead types. So I'm asking you, what in God's name did we see that day? I prefer to remain completely anonymous, since I'm one of the few people still involved in the traditional moonshine trade of the South. Believe it or not, it is still a thing. You just don't see as much of it as you used to. Law enforcement tends to turn a blind eye these days, and a big part of the draw of the whole thing was making money off something you weren't supposed to be doing. But anyway, this story happened when I was barely 13, and the law had hauled away enough of the family to make a good dent in our moonshining. Living in the mountains just wasn't protecting us like we had hoped. So, the older guys decided it was time to teach me what they knew, so that I could step up and help out with the family business. Worst case scenario, I know how to make money if I ever ended up by myself and keep me and my siblings fed. They showed me how to rig up a moonshine, still out of anything, including old car parts. They showed me how to grow the grain and make it into a mash. I supposed back in the day, I got the equivalent of a college education from those old kinfolk. But in the process, the old family tale took on a whole new dimension of reality. They emphasized that if there was anything that I should not let slide, it was leaving out some fresh moonshine for tall Charlie. And it better be fresh. If it's more than 12 hours old, he wouldn't have it. And the drink had to be offered on the old Signal Hill, on the petrified tree stump, on the night of each new moon. All of my life, I had heard my family saying things like, "Buy tall Charlie's whiskers," and "Charlie take you," and other superstitious sounding stuff. I think the best one was giving someone a Charlie gift, something you gave to the wife when she was mad at you. I just went with the flow, being surrounded by that talk all my life. I guess I filled tall Charlie away in some pigeonholes as Santa Claus. But there's all the old men in the family standing over me, with crazy wide eyes, telling me how important it is to leave out a fresh nip for tall Charlie. Part of me just couldn't take them seriously. I think they picked up on it, and they grew stern with me for days. I heard Charlie's name so many times. It's a wonder my ears did not bleed. So I humored them. I got into the full swing of making liquor, and I was the first to make sure that tall Charlie got his share. I personally took it to the old Signal Hill myself. I won't lie. The place had a funny way about it at night, during a new moon, when you couldn't see a thing. About a year went by of me doing all this, and by the time I was 14, I was asking some rational questions. Each time I went up to the Signal Hill with a new drink, the old one was gone, unless there was a bear or raccoon that liked getting sauced. It was the work of some living person for sure. One new moon, I decided it was time to bring some food and something to sleep on, 'cause I wanted to see which one of my family, or whoever, was making the trip to get a little bit of moonshine from the Signal Hill. It had to have been family. I thought all that witchy offerings and sacrifices were done during full moons. Why the new moon, when you have a slim chance of being seen and identified? It was just too convenient. So, I set down the offering on the stump, and I hid back behind the big old fallen tree, and I covered up my lantern so I wasn't this obvious blob of light. I started to doze when I heard movement. I uncovered the lantern and sprang out into the open like I was going to arrest somebody. I really should have been more cautious. There was a figure leaning over to take the drink. That had to have been the tallest outline of a person I had ever seen in my life. And that was all I could see, an outline. The body of the thing seemed to absorb light, making it a shadow. My lantern lit up most things around it, but not the person itself. There were 2 points of light, like pearl marbles, and they gazed through me as it turned its head to see who was interrupting its moment with the drink. Then, there were other points of light when it showed its teeth. I supposed it could have been a smile. Felt more like a territorial snarl. I didn't stick around to find out. I cut out of there pretty quickly, and I'm pretty sure I pissed down my leg while I was running away. So I don't travel too far from my homestead. I've lived close all my life to make sure Charlie gets his drinks on time, every time. I'm a professional landscape photographer, and about 2-3 years ago, during the winter months, I was out in the state of Colorado, higher up in the mountains, shooting some shots, and traveling on different locations to find the best shots to get. This happened when I was traveling to a destination in the mountains. I was going up a rather large hillside when I discovered, to my right, were two large, upright, tall, and black humans, or humanoid persons, carrying a large dead buck. There was one in front, who had its front legs, and one in back, carrying its back legs. It was most certainly dead, and unfortunately, my camera and my tripod were all put away and in my backpack. They were gone in just a matter of a few seconds, faster than I would ever have time to pull up my camera and get a good shot. Not to mention, these figures were also several hundred yards away, enough that I could see that they were persons. But there's two main reasons why I suspect they were not humans, and something else. My speculation being Bigfoot. Number one, I'm up here in a very remote, desolate area in the mountains. There shouldn't really be people around, and it wasn't hunting season that I was aware of. Number two, they moved very fast, and even from my distance, they were all black, like pitch black. Plus, their size in comparison to the dead buck, which I could see from my distance was rather large, something did not seem right. And I think that was my very first time ever seeing Bigfoot up here in the Rockies. I live in a corner of the mountains of West Virginia that the world seems to have forgotten about. I don't know if they did that on purpose, or if they just haven't sent enough people out here to truly document things. I found out the hard way that you are lucky to be alive if you come out here and you don't know what you are getting yourself into. I'm lucky to be alive myself. My story started when I was 17, and I was just about as wild as any boy could be. You couldn't exactly go to a bar to find fresh meat to grill for the night, but there were plenty of young girls among our so-called God-fearing families that were just as wild as I was. You just had to know how to meet them when their parents weren't around, and yours weren't around at the same time. At the time, I had met the wildest little mountain flower I have ever laid eyes on, and she seemed to think just as highly of me. Her eyes kind of turned black when she looked at me. We didn't waste any time in figuring out when she and I could spend some solo time alone. Her paw must have caught wind that she was falling for a loose boy, 'cause she was set that she had to come to me, and it wouldn't be good if I came to her. I lived with my grandparents, who were well on their own way to being blind and deaf, so I had made it. She and I, and our time together, as much as we pleased in a treehouse I had built. Nobody knew about the place except me and the girls that I took there. You can only do so much boinking there before you're interested in really talking. I didn't have any interesting stories for her, besides the fact that I'd been forbidden all my life from playing around what Grandma called the sandy part of the mountains. Even as a young adult, I got told pretty regular that I should not go there. She was a daredevil and wanted to see the sandy parts. I was surprised at how afraid I was to actually overstep that boundary. I never had. I could overstep all kinds of bounds with girls, but not going to the sandy parts. So I sucked it up, and I agreed that we'd go the next time we were together. The sandy parts weren't all that sandy. They were just rough, and not much grew there. Lots of gravel rock in the soil that only hardy, scrubby plants could handle. It also seemed unusually dry, though the rain fell there as much as it did anywhere else. I was watching a fox looking for bugs, thinking about how foolish I must have looked, being so spooked by an arbitrary rule my elders came up with. I had not seen a single thing to watch out for. My girl called me over to look at something around a bunch of half-buried boulders. There were two things she was checking out. There were deep scratch marks in the boulders. the kind that are made by hours of scraping. There were also what looked to be recent bloodstains, but it was also dried, so it was that rusty color. I was able to convince myself that it was something else. I heard a painful yelp over yonder, and we went to see what it was. There wasn't much left of the fox that I saw earlier. The tail was a bloody stump, and shreds of skin had been flung everywhere, sticking to the faces of the rocks. Bad as that was, it bothered me even more how quickly that had taken place. I eyeballed the ground for footprints, but nothing. I was pretty well spooked, but my girl was more fascinated than anything else. She starts babbling about going on a whole monster hunting expedition to see what was lurking in the sandy parts. Something about her, the way it made me afraid, and I wanted her to get to safety. That just made her mad, like she was a wild bird resisting being caged. I wondered if that's how her parents felt when they found out about me. All of a sudden, we were having a pretty bad argument over the entire thing. That's when I made the biggest mistake that I could have made. I stomped off in anger and left her there. I wasn't gone long. I sat under a tree for about 30 minutes, somehow accidentally dozing off. I came to and noticed that she had not found me. I went back over to the sandy parts, and that's pretty much where my life ended in a very real way. Remember what I said about the fox? It was the same with my girl. Her blonde hair was flung every which way, human bones picked clean, strewn all over like garbage. The prettiest girl I'd ever knew was treated like litter. I was hot, let me tell you, and I made revenge a personal matter. I hung out alone in the sandy parts, waiting for whoever or whatever was there, and I had my hatchet ready every waking minute. But the murderer never showed. Once, and only once, I thought I saw something like a long insect leg poking out from a rock, as if the rock were some sort of shell, and that leg was longer than a cat's tail. I looked that rock over, tried even smashing it, but nothing. I never found out what was killing and eating when I wasn't watching. I did the right thing and got the police involved, and no matter how bad I looked, miraculously, they didn't put me away for it. Part of me wanted them to, but they did not have enough to pin it on me. That was either the most honest set of cops in the world, or another degree of cruelty on the part of the thing that would kill and eat everybody but me. Like its will extended to leaving me with the worst possible guilt. So, there you have it. If you find yourself in the mountains where it's all dry and rocky, and animals are disappearing, then do yourself a favor and leave while you still can. My story takes place back in 2012 when I hiked Camelback Mountain in Arizona. During this day, it was pretty dead, and Camelback Mountain is usually pretty full of people. You're not far from civilization, so it's not like you're out in the boondocks. It's a pretty well-traveled area. I just think this day, I was the only person on this section of trail that I could see behind me and ahead of me. If you don't know what the trail is like, it's not dirt or surrounded by trees. It's pretty much a straight rocky path up. Boulders and rocks everywhere, with all sorts of mountain Arizona brush around. At one point or another, I was starting to feel a very eerie sensation, like I should just turn around and leave. Unsure of why I was feeling that, I subsided my feelings, and just paid no attention, paid no mind to such ridiculous feelings, I wasn't about to turn back. Until, directly ahead of me, I saw the largest coyote crouching behind some brush, and it appeared to be watching me. I instantly knew it was a coyote, due to its coloring and shape of face. I mean, if you know what a coyote looks like, then you know. Except, even from the distance it was at, I could tell it was much larger than any regular coyote. That's when I kept walking toward it, not thinking too much, and just thinking how weird it was, when all of a sudden, this coyote stood up, as if to stop me from coming toward it. And then, when it stood up, all hell in my mind broke loose. When I say it stood up, I mean just like a person. 2 legs. And I saw that its body was just like that of a hairy man. Chest, arms, legs, everything about it besides the head was human, but covered in fur that resembled a coyote's fur. Because of the brush and rocks, I couldn't really see any hands or feet, but it was enough for me to know that this was something of another world, potentially a shapeshifter or skinwalker, like I've heard about in tales before. But I thought that was only a Navajo thing, or a Native American thing. This all happened in my mind within a few seconds of seeing this thing. That's when I turned around, and I fled down the trail. It never followed me, but it's a reason why I don't go back and hike on Camelback Mountain anymore. Now that so many years have passed, and I've got to expand upon my knowledge of the area and things of the area, I truly believe it was somebody, a native, I think, who was wearing a coyote skin and had the ability to take its shape and form, or a shapeshifter, as you call it. That's what I believe. The coyote, or person, even though when it fully stood up, wasn't any more taller than I, and I'm 6 foot even, and even I can tell you when it stood up on 2 legs, it was a threatening posture, like it was getting ready to meet me face to face, like it felt threatened, and not like it was going to run off. Why this person, or thing, or coyote, was crouched down behind the brush watching me, I'm not sure. It's possible it had been there for a while, and I had just come on that side of the trail, and this thing saw me coming, and then I saw it, and it didn't know what to do. So many possibilities. But to be honest with you, I don't have an answer at all. I'm just merely guessing. But what I know for sure is I encountered something on that day. Something that wasn't entirely human. I was in the Rockies, working as a consensus man, of all things. You'd be amazed at the theories and misconceptions people have about me and what I do in my line of work. I'm a government spy. I'm a criminal, posing as a government employee. I'm actually counting people on behalf of the USSR, instead of the US, and so on. So I was a little more than dog food with legs, as far as the mountain people were concerned. I had one house to go, and then I could get out of those godforsaken mountains. I prayed that they were home, halfway friendly, and didn't have large dogs. As far as mountain homes went, it was something of a mansion, just a very rustic one. Also, the property seemed to be sprawling. I felt like I had stumbled onto the land of one of the oldest and biggest families in the mountains. Knocking on the imposing front door got me nothing but silence. I made it a point to knock loudly, just in case there was a dog on the property, and he would give himself away, barking at the disturbance. There was no such reaction. Mountain people weren't known for vacating their homes of anyone and everyone at once, so I wondered if the place was even still lived in. It did not have the abandoned feel to it. There was a truck that looked like it had been in use recently. There was clean laundry out on the clothesline. So where was everybody? I grew bolder, and I went out to the nearest open structure I could see, the barn. It was so old that most of the red paint had flaked off. It was generously stashed with hay bales, the ceiling high, to the point that it felt like a cathedral instead of a barn. The strange feeling was growing stronger, and I felt like I was being watched. I had been looking up so much that I didn't notice the obvious pile of bones in the center of the barn floor. There were human skulls glaring at me, so no amount of rationalization would protect me from the fact that people did die here, unnaturally. Even worse, there were still spots of moist pink on the bones. This being all recent work, and no police tape anywhere. I wasn't going to find a phone out there, so I did the next best thing. I took out my old company camera and began taking pictures with the film I had left. I don't know what made me glance up, but I saw something pale and large clinging to the corner where the wall and ceiling met. It had long fingers and toes like that of a frog. Its vertebrae poked from underneath its taut skin. It was hunched, also like a frog, but I could tell that everything about it was long and tall. It could have been a trick of the shadows, but it looked like it didn't have much of a face, other than 3 black eyes arranged in a pyramid formation. There was nothing to indicate a mouth or nose. I reacted on instinct, and I ran. I felt the impact of the creature on my feet as it leapt down from its perch. I could tell that it was closing in on me with blinding speed. I suppose there's a 1 in a million chance of surviving anything, and the odds decided to be in my favor that day. I could hear it behind me, gaining quickly. I timed it in my head when I guesstimated that it would make the killing pounce. I dove at a perpendicular angle to the truck I had passed before. It shouldn't have worked, but the monster kissed the grill of the truck full force. I glanced over my shoulder to see its shape slump off to the side. It was stunned at least, and I prayed that was enough time for me to make it to my own vehicle. My lungs were burning, and my out-of-shape body was begging for me to stop running. I almost gave in when I heard the scampering of the creature behind me again. It was closing in faster this time, and it must have been furious. The instant that I had shut my car door and locked it, the creature had thrown its body against the window. I was arrested for a moment by the bottomlessness of those black eyes. That was the first time I noticed that there weren't any eyes in those 3 sockets. They were just empty holes that extended into a darkness that was deeper than the head they sat in. They were as expressionless as the eyes of human skulls, and yet I could feel the boiling rage they seethed. I snapped out of it, jumped over to lock the other doors. No electronic locks. The monster was half a second behind me as it tried each door. Then, it resorted to slapping the glass. I started my car and tried to lunge backwards and run over it, but it was too fast for that. The cab of my car thumped, and my heart pounded so hard that I thought I'd have a concussion from it. The monster was on top of my car. I had visions of the thing clinging to either the top or the bottom of my vehicle, all the way into town, and then finally snapping my neck as soon as I dared to step out of it. I peeled out and looked in my rearview mirror. Nothing. It was still with me. I drove into the nearest town, found the police station, and began honking my horn like crazy. Several officers came out looking confused and annoyed. I put them through the business of checking my vehicle for for anything unusual. They thought they were looking for drugs. My heightened state convinced them that I was on something, but they couldn't find anything above or below, so I gradually accepted the idea that the monster had given up at some point. I handed over the camera with its pictures of the carnage at the mountain home. I was never able to find out how far they pursued the case. Even today, I still think I see the thing out of the corner of my eye, still stalking me. If it really is still with me, I wonder what it's waiting for. Maybe it's being cruel, and it wants to scare me to death. Maybe I'm mentally scarred, and I'm cursed with hallucinations and jumping at shadows. Either way, what I saw was real. What it did to that family was more than real. This was only back in 2019, and when I still think about it, it still scares me. So even writing this is kind of tough. I just would rather forget about it. But I suppose it's best to at least send it to somebody that can use it to help other people who have dealt with similar things. Back in 2019, as I said, I was out camping with my family and several very close friends. Near our campsite, well, not even a campsite, we were kind of out in the woods, so not anywhere at a campground. Back where we were, we had a nice little spot, a clearing, I guess you would call it. Well, come evening time, we saw several deer come through the area. No bucks, just a bunch of doe, blacktail to be exact. Right around sundown, we saw a couple more doe come in. We weren't really paying any attention to them, since we're used to seeing deer all the time where we live, but they are beautiful to look at. After they left the clearing into the woods, we heard a huge giant roar that sounded like a lion, but 20 times bigger and more ferocious, and then crashing in the woods, away from our campsite, as if something was running after those doe. All of my friends and my family, we all heard it, and we were all pale and wide-eyed for the rest of the night, thinking, what on earth did we just hear? A few of my friends suggested it was probably just a mountain lion, and the distortion of being outside made it sound much bigger than it actually was. Except I'm no fool. There's no way a mountain lion could sound like that. And there's no way a mountain lion would go crashing through the trees. They're a silent killer, or at least they try to be. This sounded like a bulldozer pillaging through the woods. I mean, you could visibly hear trees and branches snapping and breaking. Whatever was going after those doe had to have been massive and very fast, because it led away from that clearing very quickly. I'm pretty glad we never actually had to see what it looked like. While many of these stories are not my own, I've acquired them from over a period of time, from many people I've talked to many people I know. Call me a wannabe amateur cryptozoology researcher, or something of that nature, but I just enjoy collecting stories of things that are not supposed to exist. The topic in question is the sighting and existence of the Goat Man. Is this a folklore tale, or is this more true than ever before? Well, around the Blue Hill Mountain area, settled in northeast Georgia, there's far more encounters and sightings of this particular cryptid than ever before. I've had many eyewitnesses come forward with their own harrowing tales of seeing this supposed beast walking around, stalking their houses, killing pets and family members, and far, far worse, by terrorizing entire groups of communities. The first story I wanted to share with you was by an older gentleman who lived by himself against the Appalachian Mountains, kind of more tucked into the woods, not entirely a loner, but his wife had passed many years prior, and all of his children, grown up and moved far away. He didn't have much, but he was by himself. This man was not a man of ghosts, supernatural, God, or angels, but he could not deny the existence of what he calls the Goat Man, because he had seen it with his own 2 eyes on multiple occasions. He described it as exactly what it sounds like: a creature looking to be half human, half goat, a perfect hybrid of the two, but not in the way that Greek mythology depicts them, with a flute in the mouth and being very gentle, docile beings. These things, from what he told me, were very violent and attempted to take his life on several different occasions. He told me, and his words were, that he believes this thing targeted him because he was an easy target, being elderly, all alone, as if it made him more fragile and weak and easier to overcome. But they never did. He kept an old rifle, passed down from his old grandfather, that he had claimed to me saved his life on more than just one occasion. These things, for whatever he also told me, have a fear of fire. He would light torches around his house, as well as looked into handcrafting some sort of handmade flamethrower-like device, not like the ones you see in movies, but some way to project flame directly out forward without being too dangerous. However, he never did achieve such a thing. Along with the fear of fire, they also appear to only be nocturnal, and that they've only ever tried to break into his house during dusk or nighttime. He's never seen them during the day, only when the light is low enough, but describes them with the words demonic, horrific, and vicious. And this same old man, and for the sake of his identity, I'll keep his name anonymous, but we'll call him Henry, just so you can understand who I'm referring to, claims that he had been living in the house he is for well over 30 years, but has only recently started to see them in the past 10, which he believes is a cycle. They only come around every so few years, for a short amount of time. And that's what he believes. Judging from other encounters and eyewitness stories, I don't exactly myself personally believe that. It could just be that they travel through specific areas, through specific years and seasons, but I don't know. I'm trying to gather as much information on Goatman as I possibly can. It's a rather new cryptid for me, so I'm still learning as I go. But, like the Skinwalkers of the Navajo region, and other cryptids that appear to be specific to different regions of the United States and the world, I've only ever heard of Goatman in the South, ranging from Texas all the way to the East Coast. So, myself, I'm wondering if this is some sort of demonic summoning ritual, or perhaps there is something more at play here than any of those things. Anything I can comprehend personally, because by the different accounts that I've read and been told, they all lead me to different directions as far as this creature's origins. Henry's encounters with these goatmen seem to come and go, and last I spoke with him, which was just a few months back, he hadn't had any encounters with these things for at least a couple years, which is good for him. Another lady, whom we'll call Annabelle, had a family with a husband, 3 kids, and a dog, living very close to Texarkana, which is the border to Texas and Arkansas. She said that she saw one in the process of strangulating her Rottweiler until her husband shot it right in the head, but didn't even seem to hurt it. But the shot was successful in driving the creature away, whether that be in fear of getting shot again or what, I'm not sure. But you think any rifle should be enough to kill anything, especially when a bullet is aimed at the skull of any living creature. This is not the case, which is partially the reason why I'm leaning somewhere on the side of this being a supernatural entity, because there are things that just defy reality. Annabelle and her family had never seen the likes of this creature before, not until this one offshoot time where it revealed itself. not caring that it could be seen by the entire neighborhood, nearly killing her dog, but only shortly before her husband noticed and took immediate action. Since this happened, back in the summer of 2012, they have not seen it return, but after speaking with Annabelle's husband on the phone, he has told me that he still hears screams sometimes, far off in the backwoods. They're not always there, and sometimes they're more faint than other times. But he says he believes the screams are from this creature, whatever it is, since he knows just about every sound of every animal they live around, and it matches no known description of any creature he's ever run into. Another very interesting account, which I personally attribute much credibility to, this particular individual. They used to serve as an officer, and I hold their word as very truthful. They have nothing to gain out of making this up, and after speaking to said individual, they wished to remain completely anonymous, so we'll call them Daniel. Daniel told me that when he was an officer working up in the state of Maine for about 4 years, he was driving in a very rural area in Maine when this thing could be seen standing up in a field next to the road. He told me he got a full look at it, from head to toe, or what could be seen in the tall grass, and said at first he assumed it might be a person with a Halloween costume and a prop, but the more he looked at it and studied it, he realized it was far too realistic looking. And the most disturbing part is that it was indeed holding a weapon, looking somewhat like an old-style axe. He was so shocked and intrigued by this sighting, he actually slowed down his police car and took a second to really take it all in. The creature, because the direction it was facing, didn't seem to take notice to his car, but he got more than enough of a viewing than he ever could have wanted to. He told me that prior to that sighting, he had never even heard of or been made aware of the folklore legend of the Goatman, and when he saw it, he was not only terrified, but puzzled at what he could be looking at. Now, Daniel knows all too well that these creatures do exist, and not just the southern states, but all along the East Coast as well. Another bizarre yet fascinating story comes from another man in his 30s that I spoke to recently. His name is Paul. Last name I won't reveal. But in the past year or two, he was hiking in eastern Pennsylvania when he encountered a strange smell and feeling. He said, if you've ever been in a thunderstorm, there's a smell to it. You could feel the denseness and the humidity in the air. You can just feel a storm coming. That's what he told me that he perceived all around him, just from the moisture, the humidity, and the smell. Only problem was, the day he was out hiking around, it was clear skies, bright and sunny, and in March. Then, he went on to say that for a brief amount of time, the air surrounding him, from feet to head, became filled with static electricity, and he felt the hair on his body and head stand up. He told me it was one of the strangest sensations he's ever had. It only lasted for maybe 45 seconds, he recalled. But afterwards, he had the sighting that would change his life and forever make him rethink entering the woods. He told me this, and I quote, I was about 3.5 miles away from my vehicle when all of these things began to happen around me. I listened to my gut, because at this point, it was screaming I should turn back. Something was wrong. I wasn't sure what, but I know enough to always trust your gut. I began making my way back, having to climb down over this small ridge, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The Goatman. The thing that I'd only ever heard about in stories, a legend that I always thought was fake. But here I was, seeing it in person, and I'll tell you this, laying eyes physically on this sort of being is the closest you'll ever get to physically seeing a demon in real life. Easily 9 to 10 feet tall. This thing was towering, and to me, resembled more of a minotaur than it did a goat man, but still had that very ugly demonic look to it. It did not have any clothes on. It did not have an axe in its hand. It seemed to be making its way across a large ridge and wasn't paying any mind to me. Had it looked over in my direction, it could have easily seen me. It's not like in that moment I had any brush or anything to hide behind. I was sticking out like a sore thumb. Had this thing just turned its head? I'm glad it didn't. It continued off into the woods and was gone. It was going at a pretty good pace. It appeared to be on a mission to get to somewhere. Maybe it came through a portal. Maybe that's why I experienced the static electricity feeling. Maybe that's why I smelt the thunderstorm on a clear, bright, sunny day. After having follow-up phone calls with Paul, he informed me that he has since gone back to that same section of woods that he supposedly saw the goat man. He hasn't seen it since, and it's not going to keep him from doing what he loves most, being out in nature. But he is very much more aware now of his surroundings, and aware of the existence of legends, or things that he thought were legend. One of the things we talked about when we were on the phone, and I'll never forget this, is when he told me, you know, if Goatman exists, what other supposed legend that we were told growing up doesn't exist, now exists? This opens the door for all realms of possibilities, including Bigfoot to Chupacabra, and even ghosts. The last eyewitness story that I'd like to share with you in this email comes from a young 19-year-old gentleman named Clay, who was out on an evening hike just this last year in 2019, when he saw, on a small segment of beach in South Carolina, what he described to me as a half-man, half-goat figure dragging, now here's the disturbing part, dragging a human body behind it. Where it was going, he wasn't sure, but he immediately didn't feel right and called 911. Police were able to go down there and inspect, but they never found anything. No footprints, which should have been impossible to not find, considering this thing was walking in sand and dragging a human body behind with it. It's eyewitness stories like these that truly disturb me when you hear just how frightened the individual was upon seeing this thing off in the distance. I have tons more stories that I can share with you, and I hope you are open to hearing them. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the stories that I've sent you thus far, and if I'm lucky, maybe you'll decide to use them. You have full permission to. Let's keep an open line of communication, as I'm sure if you do use this, your viewers will be hungry for all sorts of other cryptid sightings. I've got plenty, as I keep close tabs with many individuals with their own horrifying personal sightings. Thank you, and take care. If you, or somebody you know, has a story or encounter they would like to share with me, or have me read on this channel, please send it to stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. The email can be found in the description below. The incident happened years back, in 2014 or 2015, when my fiancé was, and still is, a well-known spoken word poet on Facebook, and got all kinds of contacts and fans through that specific medium. She went to places too, in and around Louisville, to speak her poetry, and hosted shows on talk show. I'm an American male of Black, Irish, and Cherokee descent, born in Long Island, but raised in Florida since I was 12. She is Black American from Chicago. I was born in 74, and she was born in 79. We were together for 4 years, and are currently separated, but still communicating. Her life and her charismatic nature seems to be a magnet for weirdos, to say the least. Strange things often have happened when I was with her. Both odd, and at times, supernatural. There were many incidents and different stories I could tell, but this one is one of the strangest. She made a contact with a Facebook follower of her poetry page. He was Black American, very handsome and well-built in appearance. Around our age, he looked like the actor who played Blackula back in the day, when he was in his normal human appearance, though they had been talking through Messenger app for a while. And even though my fiancé was very worldly wise, full of street smarts and a great hustler, so to speak, as Chicago women can be, she is a baptized, believing Christian since she was 11 years old, and this guy said he was also a saved Christian. They talked, and over time, I guess he began to trust her and open up. I am not a jealous man, and knew that the life she was involved in automatically involved communications with all sorts of people, and besides, she was not the type to cheat. She always confided in me anything that was strange or unusual. Apparently, this guy was well off somehow. I don't remember what he did for a living exactly, but he and a close buddy of his traveled often. He said he went to somewhere in Asia, maybe near Tibet. I'm not exactly sure since the incident that occurred had been a while. Apparently, he found out a ritual from some Asian occultist of how to become a werewolf. He didn't say exactly what the ritual was, but it was very evil, involving human sacrifice and selling your soul. Apparently, he and his buddy decided to do this evil thing because they liked the idea of having that much power. Over time, the things he had done began to take over every aspect of his life. He killed and killed from time to time, but grew tired of it and felt he was losing control to the spiritual power that he gave himself over to. Over time, he decided he needed to do whatever was necessary to correct this mistake. He managed to find, after much searching, a deliverance pastor with knowledge of the reality of these things that occur in the occult who would help him. He said he was delivered and later baptized by this man. But sometimes this darkness and pure wrath would start to fill him up at times, and he started to revert back into his evil beast ways, and prayer would stop it. My fiancé, taken aback by all this, was shocked, to say the least. She, of course, being normal-minded, thought he was nuts. She did not believe him, and made the mistake of even mocking him a little bit. He later sent a picture of himself and a short recording that scared the crap out of her. She showed it to me and let me listen, and it freaked me out. We were both in agreement, without taking just facial expression and body language, that she should cut all ties with that man. The picture showed him looking intently into the camera, with animalistic eyes that had a slight shine to them, like canines do. He looked so intently wrathful that if looks could kill, we'd all be dead. His right shoulder was shifted out of place, as though somebody had stretched it from his neck close to 6 inches. The muscles on that side looked swollen too, as if pumped up with steroids, while the left shoulder was somewhat normal. He had on just a tank top, so you could see his upper shoulders pretty good. And the only thing I could say is it looked like his body was in the process of starting to morph into something not normal. Then, I listened to the recording. It sounded like a cross of two things. Take a big, deep, guttural growling wolf sound, and cross it with the deep voice of a man. And that is what he sounded like. He said, with the most severe disdain and hatred, "How dare you mock me? How dare you judge me? Don't you ever mock me." And my jaw dropped. I had no impression this was just a prank. There were photos too on his Facebook page that was suspect, in the way of being odd. His eyes, how he looked weightlifting. Just different things that this guy said and did is something so normal serious person is not to be messed with. Later on, I found a video on YouTube called Werewolves and Vampires, Real or Fake, and I learned more about that craziness that goes on in the occultic world. I found other channels like your channel, and found you later after that. And I've got to say that as a truck driver of 25 years, I'm glad, truly glad, I've never run into one of these things on the road late at night, and hope I never do, because at the rate of these accounts of seeing these things that are apparently going up and up and up in recent years, that means America has a serious infestation problem of these beasts, and it might become more common in the near future for many people in the country areas not to be able to go out at night, period, or camping anywhere else in state parks or forests, or lead to an exodus of people to more highly populated areas. Well, that's my story. I believe she had another encounter where she and a girlfriend of hers were at a club in the city, and these people talked to them into going to a private house party. When they got there were others who had weird predatorial eyes, and one claiming to be a vampire, and he wondered what their blood tasted like, in a supposedly sarcastic, joking fashion. They freaked out and ran to her car and sped away. All the while, a few of them were speed walking fast behind them with weird grins on their faces. Let's just say that my fiancé is really careful about where she goes out at night and the weekends and who she is with after that incident. I could tell you more, but it's probably best I cut this email short so I can be a riveting story for you and not just a long book. Stay safe and be well. I really appreciate what you are doing to enlighten people about what is going on in our crazy and getting even crazier world that we live in. Well, I'm a huge fan of your channel, so I wanted to send this to you. Do with it what you want. I thought you would like to know what I came across after a walk and taking photos, just off a pretty regular traveled bike trail. I had known about the Bigfoot as I seen one as a young girl hiking in the mountains here in the Northeast, but I had no idea until now that Bigfoot and Dogman do hang in packs, as in the wild wolf packs or others. I guess I can call myself a witness or researcher and have been studying Bigfoot for most of my life now. I have many stories to send, but I'm not really a good storyteller. Let's just start with this one. I live in the Northeast. I was just out for a walk into my little favorite spot off the biking trail. It has a stream for fishing, and I had been going there to fish and to just hang in the woods. This time, I was just checking it out and took a path off the blacktop park that the bike trail is at, into where the fishing spot is. I didn't smell anything, but I did notice no birds or movement in the woods. This had me on high alert, 'cause I had a bear stalk me in another area, not far away from this spot. So anyway, I had a feeling just to stop walking on this trail and take a few pictures and leave. Did just that, and went home after getting home. I was scanning my pictures and got rid of bad ones and scanned the ones I like. In one picture, I could see something but didn't know, so I put the SD card in my laptop to view the larger screen. Well, what was standing just a foot off the trail, behind a small tree with most leaves gone, due to it getting late into fall, was a Dogman holding a baby Bigfoot. I was just standing less than 20 feet from it when I took the picture. Sure glad I didn't go any further up that trail. I believe it's a game trail due to the fact I seen the black bear there too. I guess they hang together in packs and are in family units. I stopped going into that area so much because, first, I knew Bigfoot was there. I've seen it. But that's just one of many stories I have. Thank you for all your stories. I do enjoy them, and am happy you are bringing awareness to people. It needs to be done. These things are running amok, literally. Especially when you just walk off a well-traveled bike trail where kids are playing and riding bikes. They are not in the deep woods anymore. They are literally in our backyards. This scares me the most. People are walking around with a false sense of security. They truly have no idea what awaits them. I hung out at night, walking the roads with friends, looking for a party or group to get together with. Never ran across a Dogman. Now, I don't go out at night, and days I stay close to the busy city. Thank you. Hi. I wrote to you before about my own experiences in 2015 with an upright canine creature in upstate New York. I want to thank you for sharing my story, and also update you on what's been going on. As you might remember, I moved since the encounter I had. It was where my neighbor, Mr. McNeil, had been followed as he rode up into the mountains. I saw the creature from the tree line, and I'll never forget it. Now, I'd like to tell you about what my buddy has witnessed since I left New York. You might remember how I mentioned a neighbor's hunting dogs being torn to shreds. Since then, chickens and pets have been attacked or gone missing. Let me start with the year following my move. My buddy, Thomas, told me that 2 chicken enclosures had been broken into and several chickens taken. I'd chalk it up to wildlife, but the chicken wire fences were literally pressed down into the ground so hard it left prints. Local wildlife does not do that. To further my beliefs, the second neighbor this happened to saw what got into her chickens. She's an elderly lady, Mrs. Weiss, a kind old lady who's been there forever. She told Thomas it was a huge, dark creature with a snout. It dug a hen out of the coop and squatted down. It had the chicken in its grasp, rotating it like corn on the cob as it bit down. She closed her curtains, going upstairs, horrified by what she saw. By midwinter, the cops now were making regular rounds and going back and forth throughout the night for several weeks. Thomas told me that Mr. McNeil's place was dead quiet. He had figured the old guy closed up and left. This was in the winter of 2018. The Catskills were dead still. No tracks, no animal activity whatsoever. At least our portion of it. Then, in January of 2019, Thomas told me that he was out in the woods when he heard the deepest, most resonant howl he has ever heard in his life. He, quote-unquote, ran like hell for at least 5 miles, he says, until he collapsed in his garage, so full of adrenaline that he said he did not even feel his legs under him. For the rest of winter, He and his family heard low howls in the night. This is very uncommon for that area. Last time we talked, he seemed okay. Not too much has happened this year. It does seem to pick up in late December or in January, especially when there's a cold spell. I'll update you more if anything significant happens.